Then you've been recently in the West Bank. How did you feel it? How did you find the people there? Are they outraged by Hamas? Are they outraged by Israel?
First of all, I was mostly in the Palestinian sections. I was in Ramallah and Bethlehem, East Jerusalem, and I went up to some of the villages in the north, some of the old villages. So I was mostly with Palestinians, but I was with actually some Israelis too. But all the folks I was with, they were angry at Israel. They felt what's happening in Gaza is an abomination, which of course it is. And the people I was with, who, by the way, were very kind and hospitable to me, I have to say that, up front, but they were very depressed. I mean, in fact, many of them won't even go out to a restaurant or whatever. They feel like they can't celebrate. In fact, the people who put me up, their daughter's getting married in a couple weeks, and they canceled the wedding. I mean, she's going to get married. They're going to have a little family get together, but they're not having a big wedding because they just feel it would be wrong to celebrate anything at this point, And so I went to Bethlehem as well, and there were no lights, no Christmas trees. They're not celebrating Christmas either there. I mean, they're going to have a mass, but they're not celebrating. They feel it would be wrong to do that given the carnage that's happening in Gaza. And it should also be said, of course, that the repression in the West Bank is also intensifying. And that also adds to the depressive mood, I would say, in the area.
What's the problem in the West Bank? What they're looking for there?
Well, I think it kind of shows what Israel's really doing in Gaza, too. I mean, Hamas is not in charge in the West Bank and doesn't have a military presence there. What they're looking for is to get rid of the Palestinians. I really think that Netanyahu sees this as his final solution, as those two words were meant, by Germany during World War II. And so the killings of Palestinians has increased greatly. In the West Bank, about 300 Palestinians have been killed since October 7th, and that's compared to the 250 or so Palestinians killed there between January and October. So that's a huge increase. And about 3,000 people have been arrested since October 7th, which adds to about 5,000 or so Palestinians in Israeli custody up to that point. So look, I think they want to get rid of the Palestinians. They want to take all of the land for themselves. They're focusing on Gaza now. But I think their plan is once they dispense with Gaza, if that happens, they will turn all their guns on the West Bank.
Antony Blinken, in his last meeting with Mahmoud Abbas in the West Bank, said that they are looking for a two-state solution. How did you find the situation of Mahmoud Abbas in that region?
Obviously, in any situation, in any society, there's divisions. I met people, of course, in the Fatah party who support the Fatah party, support the Palestinian Authority, support Abbas. But most people I met feel that Abbas and the Palestinian Authority have let them down. I think objectively that's true. They've been suppressing protest in the West Bank in support of Gaza. The Palestinian Authority police often operate in concert with Israeli forces to repress Palestinians. And certainly the Palestinian Authority does not resist Israeli incursions into Palestinian territory, even in what's known as Area A, which Area A, since the Oslo Agreement, you have Area A, B, C. Area A is where the Israelis are forbidden to go. Now, by Israeli law, they're forbidden to go. And yet they go in all the time and arrest people, kill people, and the Palestinian Authority doesn't say boo. So I think, most people see that. Most people see that they're not operating on behalf of the Palestinian people, sadly.
Your new book, The Case for Palestine, Why It Matters and Why You Should Care. It's a very good example of describing the situation of Gaza right now, what's going on between Israel and Palestine.
And I think what people have to realize is that, first of all, that Palestine has existed for centuries. A lot of folks who defend Israel try to claim that Palestine doesn't exist, that there really aren't Palestinians, that when Israel was founded in 1948, that it was, as they say, it was a land, a people without a land that found a land without a people. But there were people there. There are many people there. Many were Muslims, many were Christian. many were Jews who lived very peacefully together and had a very developed society, which again, a lot of people try to deny now, even to Jesus Christ, who was a Palestinian. And those things have to be dealt with and acknowledged, and that the Palestinian people who have been removed from the land of Palestine, now known as Israel, or who are internally displaced within that land, they have a right of return legally by United Nations resolutions. But this is being denied, you know. The other thing people have to realize is that the war, so-called, of Israel against Hamas is really not that. Really, what is happening in Gaza is a genocide. Israel is focusing on destroying the civilian population there, and they're doing it. I saw some news reports actually citing Israeli sources that the number of civilians, or the rate at which civilians are being killed in Gaza, exceeds any war in the 20th century, even World War II. The proportion of women and children being killed by the Israelis in Gaza is unprecedented. The number of UN workers killed by Israel in Gaza exceeds any other conflict since the United Nations was created. More journalists have been killed by Israel in this conflict than in any other conflict. On, you know, at many measures, this is the worst conflict that we have ever seen, certainly in our lifetime. And the other thing people need to understand is that the history of Palestine is world history. It is a rich history. It has incredible antiquities and holy sites for Christians and Muslims and Jews that are being destroyed right now as we talk. UNESCO said that, you know, at least 100 significant sites have been destroyed in Gaza. The third oldest Christian church in the world has been destroyed in Gaza. A number of historic mosques have been destroyed. Libraries and universities that house important documents and antiquities have been destroyed. These are things that will never be reclaimed, that we will never get back. You know, and people talk about the Taliban, which, you know, destroyed, you know, these statues of Buddha, for example. What Israel is doing is 100 times that, and everyone should be lamenting it. And I think that in the West Bank as well, that Israel will try to do the same thing. And so we're losing human history. And whether you're a Muslim or a Jew or a Christian or an atheist, you should be concerned about this. You should care. And you should care, if you're an American, that your country, your government is funding this slaughter in Gaza and this destruction of history itself.
And when it comes to the solution to this problem in Gaza, in the West Bank, in Israel, what are they feeling about this solution? Are they considering two-state solution?
Most people I talk to believe that the two-state solution is dead. And it's dead because Israel killed it. It killed it very shortly after, started killing it shortly after it was agreed to under the Oslo Accords. The apartheid walls that exist throughout the West Bank did not exist before the Oslo Accords. These checkpoints throughout the West Bank did not exist before the Oslo Accords. One individual told me she believes that the result of the Oslo Accords is in fact worse than the Nakba of 1948 for what has happened. And everyone has seen that map. If they haven't, they should go look for it. It's easy to find. Of Palestine before 1948, after 1948, after 1967, and today. And you will see that the territory in which Palestinians live has just shrunk to almost nothing. And the West Bank is now pockmarked by all these Israeli settlements, cut off from the Palestinians with these walls. Given that there is no two-state solution, Gaza now, by the time this is over, and it does not give me relish to say this, there will be little left of Gaza. And now there's little left of the West Bank. So where is the two-state? Where's the second state going to be? Israel has set it up so that there can't be a second state. And so, you know, the people that I talk to believe there should be one state, a pluralistic state, multi-ethnic, multi-religious, multicultural, very much like that envisioned by the US Constitution, right? Which hasn't always worked perfectly, and certainly didn't in the early days of the Republic when we had slavery and genocide against the Native Americans. All those things happened. And it doesn't work perfectly still, but over time, it has certainly gotten closer to that ideal envisioned in that Constitution. And that's what people now want in Israel, Palestine. They want one person, one vote, regardless of race, ethnicity, religion. And isn't that what the West says everyone should have? I mean, that's the irony. The West says, oh, you shouldn't have dictatorships or monarchies or theocracies like Iran. They say, oh, that's bad. You have an Islamic republic. That's no good. Well, in Israel, you have a Jewish republic. And why do we tolerate a theocracy in the 21st century, especially when the manifestation of it is brutality, the type of brutality we're seeing right now, which is unprecedented?
How these people are feeling about Turkey, Saudi Arabia.
People are very disappointed by the lack of support they've gotten from the Arab world. I think the only exception or exceptions they feel are Yemen, Hezbollah, although frankly they would like more from Hezbollah, but also understand its limitations. To some extent, Algeria, which probably is helping as much as it can, and that's the extent of it. There's really even Iran, which claims to be the best friend of the Palestinians, beyond words, hasn't done a lot. I mean, I guess they've supported Hezbollah, which is something, but I think the Palestinians feel let down. They feel like the Arab Muslim world has let them down. And again, objectively speaking, it has in large part or in most part. And by the way, it doesn't have to, the support from the Arab world doesn't have to manifest in military support. An oil embargo against Israel, like the one that OPEC had in 1973, would do a lot. And yet the Arab countries continue to sell oil to Israel, which they need to prosecute this war. In fact, I went to the West Bank from Jordan. I flew into Amman, Jordan, and by land crossed the bridge, the King Hussein Bridge, into Palestine over the Dead Sea. And as I was crossing over into the Israeli section, I saw lines and lines of oil tankers, and all of them had Arabic lettering on them. All of them were from Arab countries. Why can't the Arab countries at least stop selling oil to Israel? And some countries continue to supply weapons even to Israel, including the UAE and even Jordan. So people know this, and they feel very let down by it.
When it comes to the Netanyahu administration's behavior that they're committing in Gaza, in your opinion, are they weakening Hamas?
Well, I don't think it's weakening Hamas. I do think Hamas is showing its military superiority over the Israeli forces. And I do think that the people left in Gaza will end up becoming militants themselves against Israel, whether in the form of Hamas or something else. At the same time, what I fear is there will be little left of Gaza when this is over. I mean, yes, Hamas will stand, but will the population stand? I don't know. I mean, look at what's happening. You have now, I mean, it's hard to keep up with the numbers, but it's something like 20,000 civilians have been killed, 8,000 or 9,000 children. Then I saw another 20 to 30,000 children have lost their parents. They're still alive, but they have no parents. What's going to happen with those children? What's going to happen? And half the population now is starving. If this does not end soon, you're going to see a huge mortality amongst the people of Gaza. And yes, there will continue to be resistance, but where are the people? Where are they going to be? And what kind of future will they have with no infrastructure? I mean, this is a very dire situation. This really is, for me, the biggest moral question that I've ever confronted in my lifetime. This, I've seen these memes that say, hey, if you wanted to know what you would do during the Holocaust, you know now, because you're doing that. Whatever you're doing, that's what you're doing. Because this is on that scale. I don't want to compare it to the Holocaust, which was a uniquely terrible thing. But this starts to approach that, and this certainly is genocidal, and this is certainly what we're seeing holds the possibility of destroying a whole people, which of course is what genocide is, and destroying all of their history or large parts of it. And that's what I fear could happen if this goes on for another couple months. So yeah, I think people need to feel like whatever they can do, they need to resist this. This is terrible. This is awful. And I've spoken to other war correspondents like Chris Hedges. Chris Hedges was in Sarajevo, spent time in Gaza too, spent time in other conflict zones. And he's older than me. He's probably certainly in his 60s, if not pushing 70. And he says this is the worst he's ever seen. And if a guy like that, who won the Pulitzer Prize, by the way, if he tells you that, you got to take it to the bank. And I've heard other people say that. So I think it's a very serious situation.
At the UN, we had a new resolution demanding for immediate humanitarian ceasefire in Gaza. Do you think that this kind of voting would put some pressure on the Netanyahu administration or even the Biden administration to bring the Netanyahu administration to some sort of sanity? Is that possible?
I don't think so. Israel has faced this for years where, resolutions are passed by the General Assembly where almost every country votes against Israel and a couple will vote against, usually against the resolution, usually US, Israel, a handful of others. And the rest of the world is voting, condemning Israel and their actions. And Israel doesn't care. Honestly, there's only a few things that will put pressure on Israel. One, economic sanctions, again, an oil embargo, the United States withdrawing some kind of support. In fact, there's some precedent for this. We know that during the war in Lebanon at some point, Ronald Reagan, who was no saint, we know, he called Menachem Begin and expressed concern about the treatment of civilians in Lebanon, and Begin overnight changed some of his policies and what he was doing in Lebanon. So we know that the U.S. holds that kind of power. So those are the only things that can change it. Well, that and it's some sort of military defeat for Israel. But I think that, the things I've set forth are the more, kind of realistic, doable things that could happen to pressure Israel. But I don't think whatever the UN does would. I mean, the truth is, even if the Security Council voted to condemn them, wouldn't change their mind. The only thing that would is if the Security Council voted for economic sanctions and or some sort of no-fly zone, right, that we've set up in other countries, and then carried that through. Yeah, that would do something. But a mere vote, a mere resolution is not going to do it.
Do you see any willingness in the Biden administration on the part of, I'm talking about Antony Blinken, Jake Sullivan, are they capable of changing their policies toward Israel?
I think the answer is no. I mean, look, if there were bigger demonstrations, if there were demonstrations that threatened the economy, if the polls showed that Biden was going down in a big way, yes, that would change the calculus. But that's not happening. I just saw a poll today where Biden has now jumped ahead of Trump. And while there are protests, and it's great that they're protesting, I've been protesting, they're not as such to threaten the system. They're peaceful protests that are not impacting the economy or, much of anything is the truth, right? I don't think a mere protest will change Biden and his administration unless they see the polls slipping. And I've been a bit shocked to see that his polls are not slipping. I mean, they have at times, but then they come back up. So short of a major slippage of public support and short of demonstrations that, again, really impact, really impact the economy, I don't see a change. I don't.
when it comes to China and Russia, is there anything that they can do to support a ceasefire in that region?
I think they could try to Russia's a member of OPEC, right? So it could try to organize an oil embargo. That would be huge. Possibly they could set up a no-fly zone on their own. I think they're afraid to do that. I think the world's afraid to intervene in that kind of way because, of course, Israel's the only country in the region with nuclear weapons, right? But let's just say that at least Russia could help organize an oil embargo. That would be something real. I think that is a solution here, is an oil embargo, and I think that should be done.
Are we getting to the point that the Biden administration says that let's go negotiate with Russians? This is not going to work for us. How do you see the situation right now in Ukraine?
I do think there's a possibility that the U.S. would want to come to the bargaining table because they do see that conflict is probably being lost, and they're worried that their resources are being spread thin because now, again, they're supporting Israel in the, slaughter in Gaza. So I do think there's a possibility that the U.S. will decide at some point that they'll have to negotiate an end to this. Yeah, I do think that's a real possibility. We'll see. I think if the realists get their way, the people who know that this is lost, that will be the upshot of it. I mean, the irony or sad tragedy of this is that there was a deal, as you know, back in March of 2022 that could have been had with Russia, in which Ukraine could have kept all of its territory. And the U.S. vetoed that. It prevented that. Those will not be the terms now. That's gone. Those terms are gone. Ukraine will, under any deal, lose certainly the Donbass, if not the two other regions that voted to go with Russia. Will the U.S. be willing to accept that? At some point, they may have to.
Biden was asking Congress to pass this fund that he's going to send to Ukraine. Is that political? Is that for his re-election in 2024? Or he's really would continue this policy in Ukraine if he wins in 2024?
Well, he may, but I do think there's two things motivating him right now. One is, yes, his re-election. He is afraid that if Ukraine faces a total defeat to Russia, that would destroy his chances of re-election. He's put so much into it, so much money, so much, of his own clout behind it. He would see it as fatal to his re-election chances. And the other thing, of course, related to that is that he and his son have corruption issues in Ukraine. And I think he's afraid if they pulled the money that people in Ukraine, even in leadership there, might do some talking and might really bring some of those corruption issues to the fore in a way that could lead either to his impeachment or, again, certainly to his losing the election. So I think those are the things motivating him right now.
And in Ukraine, do you think that Zelensky is capable of negotiating with Russians?
Yeah, I think Zelensky's probably done or close to being done. But honestly, it doesn't matter who's in charge in Kiev. The truth is, it's the U.S. that's going to negotiate this. Again, is shown by the fact that when Zelensky had a deal with Russia in March, the U.S. intervened to say, no, don't do it. And he listened. I think whatever deal happens, it's going to be made, in reality between the United States and Russia. And whoever's in power in Kiev at the time will be at the table, but will be a silent partner of the United States.
If you remember, International Criminal Court charged Putin for displacing those children in that region, in Donbass. Right now, with what we're seeing, what we're witnessing in Gaza, do you think that policy of Putin was a good policy?
From what I understand, he was doing it to protect them, and I think I believe that to be the case, and I don't criticize him for that. And I think that the ICC indictment was politically motivated, just like the ICC's refusal to do anything about the slaughter of thousands of children in Gaza is also politically motivated, right? The ICC has lost all credibility now. That it would go after Putin for that, but remain silent about what's happening in Gaza a much worse humanitarian situation. To me, makes the ICC exposed for what it is, and it's just a lackey of the United States. I mean, I'm sorry to say that, but it's just a fact.
If you remember, right after these charges coming from the International Criminal Court, they were talking about that Putin right now is isolated. We have been in this war in Ukraine for 19 months. Is Putin isolated, in your opinion? What?
No.
And who's isolated, in your opinion?
I think the United States is isolated. I mean, when you look at the Security Council vote, there was one country voting against the Security Council resolution calling for a ceasefire, and that's the United States. It's the U.S. that's now totally isolated. Russia's not isolated at all. Most of the world, or that is to say, the countries of the world that represent a majority of the world's population, support Russia. And even the countries that on record support the United States, I think many of them quietly do not support what the U.S. is doing. I think the U.S.'s influence in the world has shrunk greatly since the beginning of Russia's operations in Ukraine. And I think Russia's influence has only gained. So this gambit by the U.S. to use Ukraine as a proxy against Russia has completely failed.
I think the Ukraine war was one of the important turning points in our history. It seems to me that it was the beginning of tremendous geopolitical changes in Europe, in Eurasia, in Asia, right now in Middle East. When you put all these pictures together, you think that the future of these countries, these Middle Eastern countries, together with Palestine, do they see their future with Russia and China or with the United States?
I think many of them now see their future with Russia and China. I think the U.S. has proven it is not capable of being a world leader. It does not have the moral authority anymore. It does not have the intelligent authority anymore to be a leader. I mean, let's face it. Compare Biden to Putin. Compare Blinken to Lavrov. It's not even close in terms of the intellectual capability of, Putin and Lavrov versus those two people. Look at the fact that the two major candidates in the U.S. are Biden and Trump. I mean, what a sorry state for American politics. The world sees this. I mean, the world is not stupid. They see that the cream is not rising to the top anymore in the United States. And we are not being run by intelligent, rational people. So, of course, they're not going to hitch their wagon to the U.S. anymore. They're going to turn towards Russia and China.
What has happened in Europe that is so strange, that is so unique in its way, the leaders from the right, from the left, who came to the power, all of them are against the war in Ukraine, the support that goes to the Ukraine war. How do you see the changes that are happening in Europe?
They're going to have to normalize their relations with Russia, if for no other reason that they need Russia's natural gas. They've depended on it even when Russia was the Soviet Union. They can't go on like this. Their economies will collapse. And also, I think they have to realize they've been betrayed by the United States, right? The U.S. has sold them a bill of goods. It's clear the U.S. blew up the Nord Stream, which Germany wanted. Angela Merkel begged Putin for the Nord Stream 2 because they need it. And then the U.S. blew it up, right? I mean, the U.S. has proven not to be a good ally to Europe. And while for a time the governments may play along with the United States, I just don't see that continuing. They will reach out to Russia at some point.
When this conflict in Ukraine ends, I think we are close to that point. And do you think that Europe and together with Russia can manage the problem that is happening right now in Ukraine? Do you think that at the end of the day, US would let Europe getting along with Russia and maybe some sort of cooperation and helping Ukraine to grow again?
I don't know the answer to that. What I do think, though, is that it's possible for Europe to go its own way. They need to follow the path of a Charles de Gaulle, who was willing to go his own way from the United States. And Europe needs to find its own independent path. And that independent path will lead towards better relations with Russia and, yes, towards finding a solution for Ukraine. I think that is possible. The U.S. may not like it. They may try to prevent it, but if Europe has the will to do it, they can do it. And I support Europe for trying to do that. I hope they do.
If Trump wins, do you think that would benefit the situation that you were talking about?
I think it could. I mean, he certainly is talking the right talk. He's saying that he wants to settle the Ukraine crisis. He wants to deal with Putin. I mean, the problem with Trump is you can't always believe what he says, right? And he said similar things when he was running for office in 2016. And in the end, he didn't really follow through with those things. But look, let me just say this. He can't be any worse than Biden. I mean, that's what I've come down on, is that Biden is the worst, and that the chances of World War III are better under Biden than any other candidate. So I won't be voting for Biden. I can tell you that. Will Trump be better? I can only hope so. I can only hope so. And then you have Bobby Kennedy, who he has a chance to win. I think he'd be better than the other two on that issue.
He's
So
getting
we'll see.
on the ballot. He's getting on the ballot in 50 states.
Yeah, I think he can do that and will, and he will make a difference. He'll make a difference. It'll be very interesting. He will certainly make this race interesting, and he'll certainly raise these issues. And I think that's to the better, for good. That's to the good.
Then we have other two candidates that, just to wrap up this session, I want to talk about Cornel West and Jill Stein. These are two candidates that are their policy is so good. It's so
so
unbelievably good. I'll put it this way. In your opinion, these type of movements that Bobby Kennedy, RFK Jr., and Cornel West and Jill Stein, that are not belonging to one of these two parties, if they were allowed, they would be part of the Democratic Party.
Yeah.
But they don't let them in. That's the problem. That's the problem that we're dealing right now. Is there any possibility of these new movements just joining each other and finding a third way of winning the US presidential election? Is that possible in near future?
It's certainly possible. The polls in the United States show that most Americans are open to a third party. Most Americans are tired of the two-party system. And most Americans do not have faith in their current government. So is it possible? Yes. But it would take what you're saying. It would take people like Cornel West, Jill Stein, and frankly, someone like Kennedy uniting together, right? I sadly don't see that happening, but look, it's possible. I think we have a better chance at a third-party candidate this year than we've had maybe ever in U.S. history. And we certainly need to break the hold that these two parties have, these two war parties. And so I wish all these third-party candidates the best of luck, for sure.